Hey everyone, welcome. I want to start right off. Let me get my cursor. Hold on. There we go. Hold on. Want to oh boy, technology. There we go. Get started here by saying today this webinar is for you if you want to become a better, higher rated, and considerably more effective trainer, teacher, instructional designer, or human resource professional, or if you're the type of professional who wants to make sure this never happens again. All right. If you've ever looked out over a seminar room or a classroom and seen this person, you know what we're talking about. Our workforce gets younger and younger, and our experience with information keeps changing. And that's why you're excited to be adding gamification into your talent development and employee mix. So really quickly, my name is Jonathan Peters, as you've heard. And I'm now the CMO, which stands for Chief Motivational Officer at Sententia. And but really, if we go back a little ways, I'm an old professor, and so I spent the last probably about last 2 decades studying persuasion and marketing, and trying to figure out why people do what they do, why they make the decisions they make. And so I got really excited about this back in 2008, and I thought, well, I'm going to change audiences. Instead of teaching all these college students, I'm going to go out and start teaching people in the professional world. And I can still remember that first day standing in front of the crowd, and I was all excited because I had this great information. And I looked out over the audience, yeah, and this is what I saw. It was in Bakersfield, California. I can still remember. And so ultimately, that's what got me to studying about presentation, because what I didn't understand was that in college, at the college level, yeah, I was a popular teacher, but that's because I had the students' grades and lives in my hands with their grading, and I was giving them exactly what they were expecting, was dry, boring lecture. So in an effort to get rid of dry, boring lecture, eventually led me to gamification and ultimately to Sententia. And so, which is what we try to do now, our goal is to entice learners. So we want to entice people to our programs, our training programs, our learning programs, want to engage them in their learning, engage them in the program, and ultimately to encourage folks to apply what they're learning, the information that they're given, to their professional lives. So that's what we're doing here today, is taking a deeper dive into this. So over the next, what do we say, 50 minutes, let's say, want to share with you what we're going to be covering. I'm going to give you a clear understanding of what gamification can achieve. I'm going to give you the five essential steps for developing a successful gamified program. You'll have a practical method for approaching gamification in your organization. And importantly, those 4 major mistakes to avoid when planning your gamification strategy. So we got a lot to cover in a relatively short period of time. Feel free to post up questions, comments along the way. I do a fairly good job at keeping track of the chat. If I miss something, just go ahead and pop it in again. All right. So as we get started, though, I want to make sure that I understand a little bit about you. So if you put in the chat bar, nothing yet, we're going to use a Likert scale. I want to know what your level of knowledge and experience is. So on a 1 to 5 scale, 5 would be you're a guru. Anyway, this means you've implemented a gamified program, a fully gamified program, you're using gamification regularly. Number 4 would be just that you've gamified a program, maybe added some elements to a program. 3, you have a theoretical knowledge, you've studied a little bit, maybe you've added a few things to a program you're doing. 2, you've learned about gamification, maybe gone through a webinar like this. And a 1, yeah, heard the term, but you couldn't explain what gamification is to somebody else. So in the chat bar on your left there, just enter in a number, 1 to 5, so that I get a feel for who we have with us, what your levels are. So we got a 2, thank you, Charles. 5, good, Leslie's in there. We got a 3, another 5, so we got a lot of folks. 3, Karen, you probably have a little more than that if you went through a level 1 certification, but good. 2, okay, great. So we got a couple 5s, got 2s, waiting for the 1, didn't see it. Okay, 2, good. Okay, so here's the thing, folks. I want this webinar to be interactive. I don't want this to be the type of webinar where you're checking your email. You can keep entering in as I'm talking here. But so I have a certain objective, and I have some behaviors that I want you to do. I want you to feel comfortable typing, entering in comments along the way. So what I'm going to do is gamify the experience for us to encourage participation. So to do this, I'm adding the ever popular badge system. So if, and you can still put numbers in, you're not cheating yet because you didn't know I'd be doing this, but if you put in a number in the chat bar, you get the Gamification Explorer badge. All right, so here's what we're gonna do. If it's easy for you to take a screenshot, you can take a screenshot, you can draw a picture of the badge here, or if you wanna just make notes on a piece of paper, keep track of how many badges you're getting, okay? And then what we're going to do, that's my personal email here at Sententia. So it's bighead@sententiagames.com. And just email me and let me know how many badges you got throughout the webinar. Now, here's the thing. Badges work for some of you. It's a game mechanic that for some of you it's fun. It's fun to collect badges, but only a select few of you. A lot of you need something more. Okay, so I'm going to add in another layer here, and what we're going to do is add a win state, a win state. Okay, so you're not just collecting badges, you have the opportunity to win. What do you win? If you stay with us till the end of the webinar, everyone on this webinar has a chance to win 2 hours of gamification consultation with Monica Cornetti. Monica will be leading a certification on Monday, July 17th, so it'll be a full day program before Serious Games starts, the Serious Games conference outside of Washington, D.C. She's recognized in the industry, in the gamification industry, for her leadership. And in fact, in Barcelona a couple years ago at the World Gamification Conference, she was elected one of the top 3 people, top 3 influencers in the whole world. And in that position, she's the only person that is focused on learning, development, training, and so on. Okay, so now we've added a win state. We're going to add one more layer here and add a lose state. And that's where you could lose out on this opportunity if you do not earn at least 4 badges during this webinar. Okay, so your goal is to not lose or to win by getting at least 4 badges. So the point is we're adding a layer of gamification even to this webinar. Okay, so what is gamification? If you Googled it, if you've been out there and you've looked around in the 5s here, they'll have their own definition. But this is one that we use. Gamification is motivational design. It deconstructs games to use the psychology and mechanics of games in a non-game context to engage users and to solve problems. So it's not necessarily about playing games. And so when we think about serious play, which we're talking about the Serious Play Conference coming up in July, we like to use Michael Wu's graphic here to look at the different types of games, from fun games all the way on the left to gamification on the right. So you'll see that those of you who are involved in serious games, you are very focused in a very specific portion of this, and there's great overlap between gamification and games that we just play for fun. So you're a select group, but also to realize that off to the right there's a whole lot of gamification that isn't necessarily about serious games. So that's why we want to present this to you, so you know that all this hard work you're putting into serious games you can apply into other aspects of gamification. So when we look at this, when we think about games, so let's start on the far left over there in the yellow area, and I want you to go back to childhood and to think about what games you like to play as a child, okay? So what games, remember you were just playing for fun as a child, there wasn't too much learning going on, at least you weren't aware of it, and so I want you to look at this, and so post up some things. What games did you play as a child? I hope we have, Scott asked, I hope we have fun all the way through. So the tagline here at Sententia is fun, it's in our DNA. So yeah, fun goes all the way across. Yeah. So this may be a little more subtle as we'll get to. All right, so post up what games you played as a child. So we have some examples to work with here. We have Monopoly and Life, which are on the screen. Do I have Life? Yeah, on the screen there. What else did you play as a child? Candyland. Remember that? Trouble with the little hopper thingy. I think that was Trouble. I was always amazed with it didn't break. It seemed to stay in contact. Super Mario Brothers, great. Finally, you get some video coming in, not just board games. Good. So when we think about those games and you think about why you like them, Sonic, Tag, Hide and Seek. Thanks, Scott, for bringing in the physical as well. See, when we think about these and why we liked them, what aspects of it made it fun? Can we apply this in a non-game context? Zelda, good. Sorry, Stephen, like sorry probably because you could go sorry. Right? You remember the television campaign. But there are certain mechanics that engaged us in these games, that attracted us to these games, that we can apply in non-game contexts. And this is to go back to the fun thing. What is it that made this game fun? Can we apply it in what would be traditionally not fun? Okay, so guess what? If you're participating, and you can still put them in, but if you wrote the game there, you get the player badge. So take a screenshot, you can draw that badge. Graphics a little fuzzed out, sorry about that. And again, that's my email. So as you keep track of these badges, just email me at the end of the webinar. Let me know how many badges you got. You can just say I got more than 4, but it's all trusting everybody, okay? So again, keep track of everything. So when we look at gamification and we look at the process we're going through here, the reason we're doing this is because there is a new normal. There is a new normal. And this is what we call the gamers, or the G generation. And when we think of the G generation, they're over 56 million strong at this point. And they include the Gen Xers. So these are folks born between 1965 and 1981. Of course, the millennials who were born after 1982, and then the Gen Zs who were born after 2001 who are coming into the workforce. And what's happening is as they move up the ranks, they're becoming managers, partners, even CEOs. And so chances are you're managing employees in this generation. In all likelihood, in your career, you'll be managed by them. Right? So they're growing and they're becoming strong. But they're changing how we do business because of who they are, how they grew up, how they see the world, and how they go after what they want. So they're expecting something different from your programs that you may not be delivering right now. So inside the field of gamification, there are 3 basic ways to focus. And so there's outward facing, what we call outward facing, and that's where we think marketing and advertising to draw customers in. There's social gaming, which encourages people to be nice, you know, like in front of the environment, to recycle, drive the speed limit, and so on. And then there's what we call internal facing, and that's when we're dealing internally. So if you're creating programs for your employees, maybe your customers, if you're training customers, and so on. So inside of training, learning, development, whatever that sphere is. So just to give you some examples of gamification on the outward facing that we might be familiar with. And the first one here that I'm going to put up there is McDonald's. So it feels like a serious game, but it really isn't. It just has a few basic game mechanics in it. Yes, they licensed the Monopoly characters, but ultimately there's the mechanics of collection. So you're collecting different cards and you might have opportunity to win. And then the ever popular scratch off. And you know how that works. You get the little card and you start to scratch it off because you could win $100,000 for a brand new car. But you probably only win, what, extra side of fries, a larger drink, or something like that. But McDonald's only runs this for a couple of weeks every year. Again, the mechanic here, it doesn't continue for very long. They keep it very short, and tremendous amounts of profits go up every time they run this campaign. So it's a very successful campaign. Another one that's less obvious that you might be aware of is the different loyalty programs that you're involved in. Because what they do is there's leveling up, there's status, there's certain game mechanics that are involved, but it doesn't feel like a game necessarily. So this is not a picture of mine. This is a fake one with John Bull, not Jonathan Peters. And so just give you some background about why I like this one. So I used to travel a lot, traveled around the country giving training programs for a couple different companies. And so I get on the plane most Sundays, and so you get status after a while, and you do that long enough. And it's what's called a run-up, and it starts right at the end of November, 1st of December, when everybody starts looking at their stats. And sure enough, December came around, and I had 6 more segments, right? And so I'm in Austin, Texas, originally from Las Vegas, still do business in Las Vegas. So needed to go out the end of the quarter, but the problem was that's only 4 segments. So from Austin, Texas, especially for flying American, you go from Austin, Texas to Dallas, DFW, and DFW out to Las Vegas. So there and back, that's only 4 segments. I needed 6. So I got to the office. I said, we got this customer out, a potential customer. There wasn't a customer yet. And I said out in East Bay, which is East Bay, east of San Francisco. And so I said, why don't I go have a face-to-face meeting? We weren't at that stage in the process at all. So got on a plane day early, actually 2 days early, fly from Austin to Dallas, Dallas to SFO, stay overnight, meet with the client the next day, get on a plane. Well, now the problem is there's tons of flights that are direct from SFO to Las Vegas. So I chose a flight, cost more money, to fly over the top of Las Vegas, land in Phoenix, change planes, and fly back to Las Vegas. So all just to get my segments in. So the point is this. Well, let me slow down there. So I spent days extra in travel, spent an extra hotel. I met with a potential client that never became a client. So I spent a lot of money, a lot of time on a client that didn't become a client. And we never needed to meet. We could have, at that stage, we were at the phone conversation stage at most. I did all of this extra stuff to get to a status. That's an example. And then this one's ever popular with LinkedIn. Have you ever noticed that that circle is never full? Why? Because what they're wanting to do is they're wanting you to give them more information. You don't want to give them more information, but they want you to. So they're using a game mechanic of you're never quite complete. You're always wanting to complete that circle so that you'll continue to give them more information. Ultimately, you don't want to tell them about your volunteer activity or what you did for a company you got fired at when you were 18, right? So that's how it's working out there. Okay? So let's look at you. Let's look at you and start thinking about you, your work, and what you're doing. And I want you to write down in the chat bar, just think really quickly. I just have a quick list here of what I came up with. You can use these or you can help share with us what yours might be. But why are you interested in gamification? And why are you going to use gamification in your workplace? So if you'll just share with us. Like I said, I have fun up there. Maybe you have a dry, boring topic and you're just tired of it and you'd like people to at least be enjoying the process. We can use it to change behavior, generations. If you're getting a younger workforce, you want to make sure you're working. A lower barrier to entry if you're doing onboarding type processes, improving your e-learning or instructor-led. So just share with us how you game development, so actually full-blown getting involved, yeah. Healing trauma reduction process, so changing behaviors, yeah, game develop as well. Educational game development, yeah, so that students actually get involved in the learning process, make it a little more interesting for them. Yeah, good. Meaningful, still building intrinsic motivation. Yeah, so if we don't have the whole carrot and stick thing, if we can put in elements, game mechanics into something, then they'll want to be in there instead of threatening them. Diversity and inclusion, of course, and actually, Leslie, there's a whole lot about that now. If men are in developing game environment, if they're the ones developing it, what does that do for other folks? So, improving learning, good. All right, a couple of you are still typing, looks like, but yeah, teacher lesson plans, good. So guess what? I'm asking for interaction. So if you posted and you still have a chance, I see someone still typing, So go ahead and get those up there. If you entered in something, you get the Creative Contributor Badge. Richard's doing decision-making games. Great. Uh, Creative Contribution Badge. So again, take a screenshot, draw a picture, make a check mark on a piece of paper, and keep track. And you can email me at the address there. Okay. So what I promised to share with you is a 5-step, what we've trademarked, a trademarked and proven process, and we wrapped it around the acronym of games. So what a lot of folks do is they just take some game mechanics and they just throw it at a program, and that's not true gamification. It's just taking some mechanics and throwing it at something. So the acronym follows this process. So first we want to start out with a goal. So what is our goals? What do we want to achieve? Why are we doing this in the first place? Then we add a layer of adventure over the process, followed by the method of instruction. What's the delivery that we'll be using? Okay, so if it's a platform, different activities, whatever that might be. Finally is engagement. This is where the game mechanics come into play. And then we sync it all up. So we make it whole. So this next example, so that's what it looks like there, but here's the game board that we use in our level 1 gamification certification. So on July 17, when Monica Cornetti does her full day certification before the conference gets started, you will receive this whole game board. But if you look at it closely, you'll notice that the 5 levels are there. It starts in the bottom left in the orange, then goes on to the yellow, light green, dark green, and ends up in the blue up there. And then finally it says the last one is to ask yourself, is this fun? So if you followed each of these stepping stones, we basically guarantee that you'll have a successfully gamified program. So it's a lot more work than just throwing a couple of game mechanics at something. So down there, identify your why. But the second one I want to draw your attention to, the second stepping stone, is who will be playing your game. And this is a problem when it comes to design in general. So whether we're doing instructional design, a lot of you are doing game design and game development. So the problem is this concept of self-hugging. Dr. Stephen Reese, he's the one that I got this quote from, he says, not only do we think everybody should be like us, but that they are like us. And what happens is we tend to create environments that we find fun, that we find enjoyable. And the problem is oftentimes the folks that we are creating for are not like us. And so to give you an example, at Sententia, we use the Reese Motivation Profile. And so I mentioned Dr. Reese. I'll give you a quick little background. His profile is the first empirically based taxonomy of human needs and desires. So I was like, especially since we have some folks in the academic world, to realize this. So very scientific, very academic. The first data set was over 80,000 people in cultures across 4 continents. So very, very specific. Signed as dozens of peer-reviewed articles supporting his data and so on. But anyway, well, we talk about this in level 1 certification. If there's level 1, there's also level 2. And so this becomes part of level 2. So I've had the opportunity to see dozens of these from folks from our fields. Okay, so in the training, learning development, teaching professions. And the profile you'll see here is typical. Okay, not average, not normal, but just typical. So what you see there, see those vertical lines? Inside of that represents 60% of the data set, so hundreds of thousands of people at this point. When you're higher, when you're in the top 20 percentile, then you hit the green, and when you're in the lower percentile, 20%, then you hit the blue. Okay, so it's not a right or wrong. This is just who we are. It makes us who we are. So, but you'll notice the third one down. That's what I wanted to draw your attention to, and that's curiosity. Curiosity, we all have the desire to learn about our environment. What's unique about those of us in learning, training, development, all of this stuff is we tend to be at least high average to all the way in the top 20 percentile when it comes to this. And it makes sense. If we like to learn, we like to share what we've learned with other folks. But the problem is usually we're creating programs for folks who are not like us. And so I always like to share this statistic. It's a couple years old. I doubt it's changed that much over the years. Um, American college graduates. So American college graduates, 42% of them will never read another nonfiction book the rest of their lives. In other words, once they graduate from college, they will never read another nonfiction book the rest of their lives. Okay? So that's who you're developing for. That's average. 42% is pretty much right down the center. So, and I would bet that most of you have read at least one so far this year. So when we think about who we're creating for, we are not like other people. So that's when we want to look at who are the people we're trying to reach. We need to create for them. We need to create for them. So like I said, we use this profile, but I'm curious what you might be using. So in the chat bar, gamification should always start with a player profile. And so how do you get to know who your players are? So if you'll share with us in the chat bar, do you have assessments? Do you do surveying, interviewing? And by the way, you know a badge is coming. So if some of us are just too busy, you have too much on your plate or nobody's told you, so you could just say too busy and you'll still get credit for it. But what type of, what do you do to learn about your players, the people who will be playing? So co-create with the population, yeah, so you get them involved. Yeah, that's a really good, the whole co-creation start now where we get other people involved to create our programs. Good. Okay, surveys, focus groups, yeah, get them in the room, sit down with them. What else? Anybody using assessments? Good. Okay, so keep those coming in, typing. Maybe you guys are thinking too much. All right. Keep them coming in. I see several of you are typing. While you're typing, I'll go ahead and give this to you. Guess what? You get the player-centric design badge. Okay, teacher and student surveys. Good, because teachers know what the students are doing. That's pretty important. Good. Surveys. Yeah, nothing structured. Shoot, hit or miss. Try it out. Good. Okay, player-centric badge, but it's important to know who we're designing for, because otherwise we tend to create programs that we enjoy, and that creates a disconnect and ultimately a waste of effort, time, resources for all of us. Okay, so I'm going to move forward here, and you can go ahead and type in some more things there while I'm talking, but this, we don't have a lot, obviously we're covering this all in a short period of time here, but I do want to draw your attention to that where the orange down there is what we're also doing is defining measurable objectives. So what is it that you're wanting? What do you want your players to do at the end of it? So they're here, where are they? So you want to have, so you'll have a gap analysis, KPIs, what key performance indicators, how you'll measure, how you'll know you're successful, and so on. We want to lay that whole groundwork long before we even get to the fun part of it, which starts in the next section, which we'll look at now, is adding in that adventure. So what is your spellbinding story? Now, for those of you designing regular games, like serious games, you already naturally will have some sort of theme, some sort of narration, some sort of story that goes through it. In the gamification world, this is often overlooked because people, like I said, they just grab a few mechanics and they throw it down on top of something, and so they fail to add in this layer. So I'm going to give you, looks like 3 examples from here at Sententia where we've added gamification to traditional training programs or learning programs. And the first one here, Monica will tell a much more in-depth story about this one. One of our great ones was a payroll administration. Company came to us and said, hey, we got this payroll law program we want to do, and we'd like it to be interesting for the participants. And so she wrapped it around the story of Snow White. Now, Snow White is in the public domain, yeah, so all of us can use it. As you might imagine, Disney got their hands on it, so they own the dwarves. So she wrapped this story around so when people would learn different things. So the poison apple was an audit, so we want to avoid an audit or the IRS coming at us and fines and so on. So so we had that layer over it. But then studying the different aspects of payroll law. So there was Grumpy Gus. Grumpy Gus was grumpy because he's been divorced 3 times and there's tremendous amounts of wage garnishment. So he's making the bare minimum the federal government will allow us to or force us to pay him because he's so much garnishment. Dopey Dan was the boss's son. He's probably misclassified because nobody knows what he does, and so on. So he had all these different aspects of payroll law. And the one I like is the Woodsman, and that's where they learned about 1099 stuff, because the queen was very specific in how he was to kill Snow White. If you remember, he had to tempt her into the woods, and then he had a special knife. He had to carve out her heart, had to put it on the platter, and then bring it to the queen, because this is a children's story, right? This is what we do in children's stories. And but the question then comes in that the instructions were very, very specific, and so does the woodsman, huntsman, I can't remember which it is, but does he do this for other people, other evil queens? Does he advertise? Does he have flexibility in the schedule, and so on? And so the point is to take this story and to wrap it around something that is traditionally rather dry and boring, to create engagement and ultimately to make it easier for people to remember. This is one of mine, so I'm proud of it. This ain't your grandma's grammar. I don't know about you, but a lot of folks don't like grammar. They don't have a good experience with grammar when they were kids. And so the idea is this: Grandma loves grammar, and she bakes cookies. And so there's dual economies. That's the game mechanics going on in this program. So the one economy is Grandma throughout the day. If you answer questions, ask questions, engage in certain ways, you collect cookies, okay? Because Grandma makes cookies. But there's also, grammar has changed since Grandma was around. See, Grandma used this thing called a typewriter. I know all of you are way too young to have ever seen one of these things, but they were called typewriters. So when Grandma would hit a period, she'd type a sentence, go period, and she went space, space, all right? But now we have computers, and so instead of 2 spaces after a period, we only put 1. So if you put 1 space after a period, you get a boss point, maybe because you've learned that business grammar is different than traditional grammar. So boss point's worth an extra $1 an hour, so roughly $2,000 a year. The problem is you've hurt Grandma's feelings, so you lose 5 cookies. And so throughout the day, you have to decide if you want the cookies or the boss points. So again, adding some game mechanics to what otherwise might be a dry, boring topic. And this one was an onboarding one that we didn't use the actual characters, but we were inspired by it. This was an onboarding for Mafeking University. And what was happening is their new instructors were coming on, and they had to have a certain portfolio created and give to the university so that the university could get funding. And relatively easy, just a lot of paperwork, and the young folks weren't getting this accomplished. So not using these characters, but inside of our heads, why don't we? It's procrastination, it's pain in the butt, we get busy, and so on. So there was lots of using examples of these characters, again, very different. You don't want to get sued by Pixar, but very, very different to create an onboarding experience for the folks at Mafeking University. Okay, so the point is this, folks, we want to create some sort of story telling, because storytelling promotes emotional engagement. Okay, this is the type of engagement that creates a positive outcome in the workplace, because employees have strong ties to their bosses, their coworkers, company values, and ultimately, story allows people to not only remember information better, but to apply it into different contexts. So even if we present it over here for this, they're able to apply the learning somewhere else. So again, we've been telling stories as soon as we had language, and that's how we communicated from generation to generation, long before we had a written language. So story. Let's go back to the board. And so we've covered the first 2 really quickly. If we look at the third area, and this is the one that you're familiar with. So when it comes to instruction or conveying information, we need to look at the platform, how we're delivering it. Is it going to be instructor-led, e-learning? What platforms we're going to use, and ultimately what activities, learning activities we'll lay in there. Because if someone's just speaking, people aren't learning. We always say learning begins when the teacher shuts up. Okay, so that's what we want to look at here. And so specifically, this one where we create the correct mix of learning activities with instruction. So it's finding that balance. And just to demonstrate this, we're going to do it live here. So if you're off playing Angry Birds right now or checking your email, this is a good time to come back to the screen because we're going to have a little activity for you. And what's going to happen is the next slide is there's going to be a bunch of random numbers. And what you're going to do is you're going to look for number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, and so on and we're just going to see how far you can go in the next 60 seconds. So hold on, let me get the stopwatch reset for you. Okay, so like I said, come back, look, we're going to start with number 1, number 2, and let me get my cursor over the right thing. Begin. Find 1, find 2, find 3. See how high you can go. And stop. All right. So what I want you to do is on a piece of paper, write down that number, not in the chat bar, write down that number on a piece of paper. So however high you got. Now, what we're demonstrating here is we can lay in a tool of some kind. We can make it easier for people to go through a process. So if there's some sort of learning they need to do or some sort of process, how can we make it easier by adding a layer into it? So I'm going to put up another slide now. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to look for number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. But I'm going to give you a tool that will hopefully make this easier for you. All right. And so the same thing. Whoops, let me reset the clock. And if you're ready, here we go. Begin. Look for 1, look for 2, look for 3, and so on. And stop. And stop. Okay. All right. So write down that number. How high did you get? I may have had some issues. I'm not sure how the microphone is coming across right now. So I was pushing mute on a couple different things. But hopefully you've been hearing me. If you'll write down that number above your other number and then subtract the higher one from the lower one. Okay, so hopefully improve the second time through. And then let's post that up on the board here. So what was your improvement? Not the highest number you got, but what was the difference between the two? Okay, so we got a 19, a 25. Good, so you guys are really improving. Maybe somebody got all of them, right? 7, good. Okay, got an 18, 11. Good, good. So you see how this gap. Okay, so like I said, if you wrote down a number, if you participated, give yourself the Move into Mastery badge, the Move into Mastery badge. So the point is that we can lay in different types of activities that help the learning, help the process going. Okay, so also that gave me a chance to grab some water. All right, so let's move it forward. So we've covered, we have the foundations there in the orange. We have some little bit of fun in the yellow. We have some activities, platforms, and whatnot in the light green. Now we get to the dark green, and finally, we get to the game mechanics. We've laid all this groundwork before we get to adding game mechanics. Now, here's the thing, folks. It's not, there's tremendous opportunity when it comes to game mechanics. And we're used to just these few, but there are over in the field of gamification, and we've identified, not Sententia, but all of us have identified over 300 different game mechanics. Okay? So here's the thing, folks. I think I've tied 130 maybe that we can use in learning and development. But there are tons that we can use, but ultimately less is more. Less is more. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. But there's so many out there besides points, badges, and leaderboards. There's so many options for us, and we want to make sure that we align the mechanics to our audience. This is why it's important that we know who our audience is, so that we know what they would like. What mechanics would they like? So at the level 1 gamification that Monica Cornetti will be giving at the Serious Games conference, you will be, you will be getting these cards, these game mechanics cards as part of it, that give us some good ideas of things that we can use, also with points, badges, but other things that we can add into our programs. And then what you'll be doing is matching the game mechanics to the different motivational profiles, so that we're not just throwing something out there, that we actually identified our audience will enjoy these mechanics. And so this is what becomes important. We don't just throw things out there and hope they stick. Once we know our audience, now we know exactly which mechanics they'll enjoy, and more importantly, which ones they won't enjoy, where they'll disengage from. And so this is an important process that we want to look at and we want to be aware of before we get stuck in when it comes to mechanics. Okay, so we've covered everything. Now we're up to the blue. We haven't covered them. We've glossed over everything up into the blue. Finally, what we do is bring it all together. And so we want to construct a cohesiveness that ties the whole project together. We don't want to just be throwing things here and throwing things there, stories here, stories there. We want to bring the whole thing together so that it feels like it's one whole system. Same thing for those of you creating and game development and so on. You want the player to have a feeling all the way through. You don't want to be scattered all over the place. So I want you to think now. I've talked for 45 minutes. I want you to think about how you would apply this information to something in your real life. So real life programs, processes, something that you have going on in your professional life. So what behaviors and learning problems could gamification help solve? And I want you to write this down, not in the chat bar, because this is for you personally, on a piece of paper, maybe on another screen or something. So write down one program, maybe there's a problem that you could use gamification for. And what this is doing is taking this information, this knowledge, what you're thinking about right now, because again, me talking, you're learning when I shut up, okay? So to think that and apply it to something specific in your work environment, so we can make this practical today. Okay, so write that down, and I'm going to have to trust that you're doing it, and because if you did it, I will trust you. You get the Talent Development Ace badge. And once again, that's my email address there. And so because it's one thing to just go through a webinar, but it's another thing to actually apply it to something that you're doing today, okay, or that you're doing at work today. All right, so we're going to shift here a little bit. So I want you to buckle up, because we're going to look at on the challenging side of gamification. And the first thing that's coming to your mind, I know, is you're probably thinking about, what does it cost? What does it cost? And for those of you on the serious game side, and game developers and so on, you're used to being extremely expensive. You know that serious play, even if it's low tech or no tech, takes a lot of time, effort, and a lot of times money. Gamification can be for a whole lot less money, about the same amount of time it would take to create a regular program, same amount of effort. But the problem is, if we haven't laid down the foundation, we haven't avoided the 4 costly mistakes I'm about to share with you, all that effort, all that time, all that money is wasted, because we create a program that they don't engage with, that they don't like, we just wasted our time. We might as well have had a dry, boring lecture. So when we look at the first major mistake that companies have is failing to answer why we are playing in the first place. They hear like, oh, gamification is really cool, let's throw some game mechanics at it. Or they have this program, they say, wow, I think this would be really great if we can make this into a game, a serious game, wouldn't that be great? But they haven't done the basics, and it's why. Why would we be doing it? What is it that, what are we going to measure? How are we going to assess that learning has occurred, that behavior change has happened? A lot of times we work with companies and they bring us in, we say, well, what on the consulting side, and it's like, well, we'll be like, well, what do you want to achieve? What do you want to achieve at the end? And they'll be like, oh, we want better teamwork. Okay, what will that look like? How will you know you have better teamwork? And they go, oh, I don't know, everybody will just be happier. they'll like their job more. See, how do we need to have clear measurements of here's where we are, here's where we want to be, and then how will we know when we've achieved it, or if we've achieved it? How will we know that 80% of people are whatever that is? And so this becomes very important inside of gamification, because with the mechanics, we can build in measurements and assessments and so on. So it's not just throwing stuff out there to be fun. We need to say, here's where they are, here's where we want them to be. Did we get them there? How will we know it? The one little trick that I have for knowing if it's a measurable, if you think of the old smart things, if it's measurable, is I'll often ask, how will we know we're halfway there? If you just want your folks to be happier or show up on time or whatever the activity or the behavior change you're wanting, how will you know they're halfway there? See, we have to know ahead of time why we're doing it so that we can measure it ultimately. And the second problem, which I've already covered, is failing to identify who's playing. And again, the problem here is if we don't know, we create for ourselves. So remember when I was asking you about what games you played as a child? If you go back to that time, isn't it true that not all your friends, your peers, liked the same games you did? I mean, nobody put up Dungeons and Dragons, but there was probably people, D&D kids in your school and so on, and you didn't like it, or maybe they didn't like your game. So maybe your siblings didn't like it. So for instance, my sister loved the Game of Life. I hated the Game of Life. But so that's the concept. So if she were to create a program, a serious game, or a gamified process, what she would do is create something like the Game of Life. I would have something that's more strategic with a clear win state and so on. So we want to make sure we know who they are so that we can create an environment for them. We can add the mechanics that are important to them. The third problem here is attempting to fix something that's broken. If your process, program, whatever sucks, there's nothing that gamification can do to make it better. You can put a coat of paint on this car and brand new tires and it still will not run. Gamification will not solve internal problems. We have to first fix it, and then gamification enhances it, makes it attractive, it helps people engage, and encourages them to apply the information. And then finally, people, when they think that gamification is all about points, badges, leaderboards. PBL stands for points, badges, leaderboards. If an LMS tells you we're fully gamified, we have a badge system, we have a point system, no. All they've done is throw some mechanics at it. Points are very basic. Badges, like I said at the beginning, have this only appeal to certain motivational profiles. And same thing with leaderboards. Most people are not attracted to leaderboards. It's a very specific group of people who likes leaderboards. And so remember, there's over 300 game mechanics that we could be using. There's so much more that we can be doing when it comes to gamification than just PB&Ls. What we call PB&Ls, points, badges, leaderboards. Okay, so how are we doing? Running a little bit ahead, behind schedule today, but so think of your questions after I will stay on for your questions. If you want to start putting them in, that's fine now. I just want to cover a few more things, and then so that we'll be done at the top of the hour here. So just I want to cover a few things and a little summary here, and then we'll get to your questions, and I'll stay on as long as we have questions, at least for another half hour, so we'll go past that. All right, so so far, just to give you a summary of what we've covered, you have a clear understanding of what gamification can achieve. I gave you the 5 essential steps to developing a successful gamification program. You have a practical method for approaching gamification in your organization. I gave you those 4 costly mistakes to avoid when planning your gamification strategy. And finally, you learned how to create a gamification strategy for your programs. And remember, I had you identify what is it that you like that you could apply. Because, see, by being on this webinar, you've demonstrated that you're serious about gamification and creating engaging learning programs. And so I want to acknowledge you for staying on this webinar because you're doing something that most people in our industry don't do, and that's taking the time to improve your knowledge. So now that you have a theoretical grasp, at least what I could give you in this hour here together, you might want to take it to the application level. And so that's why I want to invite you to the Monday, the pre-conference session that Monica Cornetti will be giving at the Serious Game Conference. And that, like I said, it'll be July 17. And you'll see it right there, seriousplayconference.com/passes and prices. If you follow that, that'll take you directly to where you can register, not just for the Serious Game Conference, which you should go to. It'll be a great time, but also can sign up for the pre-conference, Monica's pre-conference as well. So really quickly, this is the only gamification certification for talent development and talent management professionals that is recognized by HRCI, SHRM, and ATD for recertification credits. You get 6 contact hours for going through the program. And again, you can register there. And if you earned at least 4 badges today and you register for the conference, your name will be entered to draw in a drawing to win 2 hours of gamification with Monica Cornetti. And so you're online now, you're watching this, and like I said, you're committed to taking it to the next level. So let me share quickly some other things that you'll get. You'll not just get the certificates, the CEUs, you'll also get the game board, motivator cards, mechanics cards, story cards, starter cards, tons and tons more. But wait, there's more, a copy of Monica Cornetti's book, totally awesome training. So just register. And remember, fun is in our DNA. Okay, so how do we do? 2 minutes to go till the top of the hour. I will stay around for questions, pop those in. I know coming late in the day for some of you, you're wanting to head out for traffic if you're at work still, but I did want to make sure we got through all the great information.